A, B plus. You really couldn't manage an A, could you?
Here is something nobody tells you about growing up as the wrong child in the right family. The damage is not always loud. It is not always a slap, a shout, a thrown dish. Sometimes it is the silence after you walk into a room, the way a conversation reroutes itself like traffic around a broken road, the way your mother's eyes go slightly flat when she looks at you, as if she is calculating something and the number keeps coming up wrong. I was born Celeste Renee Beaumont on a sticky August morning in Birmingham, Alabama, the third child of Patricia and Raymond Beaumont. My sister Adrienne was 5 years older and considered, by every adult in our orbit, to be essentially perfect. My brother Marcus, 2 years my senior, was loud and restless, and beloved for both. And then there was me, quiet, brown-skinned in a family that quietly prized lightness, book-smart in a household that rewarded social performance, slow to laugh at the right things, prone to noticing the wrong things. I was 12 years old the first time my mother said it out loud. We were in the kitchen after Sunday dinner, the smell of cornbread still hanging in the air, and I had made the mistake of correcting her in front of company. Aunt Beverly had asked about the Battle of Gettysburg for some reason I can no longer remember, and Mama had said something slightly off, and I had opened my mouth without thinking. Just a small correction. Gentle, even. The kind any teacher would have praised. Patricia Beaumont set down her dish towel and looked at me the way you look at something you have stepped in. "Celeste," she said, her voice smooth and quiet, the most dangerous register she had. "You have been an embarrassment to this family since the day you were old enough to talk." Adrienne was standing near the refrigerator. She did not look up from her nails. I remember thinking, that cannot be right. I must have misheard. But I had not misheard, and I knew it, because my mother's expression did not change. She picked up her dish towel again and continued wiping the counter, as if she had simply stated the weather. I was 12. I had made a B plus on a math test that week, been complimented by my English teacher for an essay about Langston Hughes, and watered the neighbor's plants twice without being asked. None of it, apparently, had been enough. None of it was ever enough. The strange machinery of our household worked like this. Adrienne was the prize. Light-complexioned, socially fluent, able to charm anyone in any room within 90 seconds flat. She laughed at Daddy's jokes even when they were not funny. She knew how to enter a space so that people turned toward her like flowers toward sun. She was, by every metric our family valued, everything I was not. And she knew it with the casual certainty of someone who has never had reason to doubt their standing. Marcus was the indulged one. His failures were explained away before they fully landed. When he got caught shoplifting a video game at 15, Raymond shook his head and said boys need to learn the hard way, and that was that. When Marcus dropped out of community college the first time, Mama cooked his favorite meal and told him he just needed to find his path. When he dropped out the second time, she blamed the school. And when I brought home a report card with 5 A's and 1 A minus, I was asked, with genuine disappointment, what had happened. I want to be precise about something. This was not a household defined by cruelty. That is what made it so hard to name, so hard to survive. There were good moments. Christmas mornings, Mama's red velvet cake on birthdays, Daddy teaching me to change a tire in the church parking lot one Saturday because, he said, every woman ought to know how to do it herself. I held those moments like coins in a jar, counted them when things got bad, but they did not cancel the other things out. They just made the other things more confusing. The comparisons became so constant, they stopped feeling like events and started feeling like weather, something you dressed around. Adrienne had 3 homecoming proposals junior year. How many did you get, Celeste? This from my mother at Sunday dinner. Not maliciously, or so she would have claimed. Just making conversation. Adrienne knew how to walk into a room. You always look like you're bracing for impact. This from my Aunt Beverly, who meant it as advice. Why can't you be easier? This from my father, Raymond, after I had asked, politely, whether we could talk about something that had happened at school. He had been tired. I understand that now. but understanding does not erase. I started keeping a journal when I was 13, not for therapy, not because anyone told me to. I started keeping it because my family had a talent for denying reality so smooth and complete that I had begun to doubt my own memory. If I said, "Mama, you called me an embarrassment last Tuesday," she would look at me with something approaching pity and say, "Celeste, I never said any such thing. You are so sensitive. You always have been." And the thing is, she said it so calmly, so convincingly, that there were moments I almost believed her. The journal was proof, just for me. Dates, exact words, who was in the room. October 4th. Mama told Mrs. Carpenter at church that Adrian was her social one, and that Celeste was still finding herself. I was standing 4 feet away holding the casserole dish. November 19th. Daddy gave Marcus money for a concert without being asked. I mentioned I needed new cleats for track and was told, "We'll see." We never saw. February 2nd. Mama laughed when Great Aunt Rosa asked if I had a boyfriend. Just laughed. Then said, "Celeste isn't really that type." I still don't know what that means. I was 14. The journal filled up fast. There was also the matter of Marcus stealing from me, which was its own particular ache. He had a careless relationship with other people's belongings, my brother did. My grandmother, Nana Jo, had passed when I was 11 and left me a small collection of things: a pearl bracelet, a pair of gold earrings, a silver ring with a small amethyst that had belonged to her mother. These were mine. I kept them in a box in my drawer. They started disappearing one at a time. First the ring, then one of the earrings, then the bracelet. When I told my mother, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Marcus wouldn't take your things, Celeste. He's not interested in jewelry." When I said I knew what I knew, she said, "I think you misplaced them. You're always in your head. You probably forgot where you put them." When I pressed further, her voice went cool. "Stop making yourself the victim of everything. It's exhausting." Nana Joe's things never came back. I learned a word the summer I turned 14. Scapegoat. I found it in a psychology book I'd checked out of the school library, not looking for anything in particular, just reading the way I always read, widely and without a destination. The chapter described family systems that needed one member to carry the weight of dysfunction for everyone else. A lightning rod, a designated failure, the child whose struggles confirmed something the family needed to believe about itself. I read that chapter 4 times. I did not tell anyone what I had read. I just started watching differently. I watched the way the room shifted when I entered versus when Adrian did. I watched the way my father's posture softened around Marcus but stayed neutral, verging on impatient around me. I watched the way my mother lit up telling stories about Adrian's social life and went vague and rushed when anyone asked about mine. The watching helped, not because it felt good, but because it transformed something that had felt personal into something I could observe from a small, careful distance. Something that was happening to me but was not about me. Not really. The worst night in those early years was Thanksgiving, my freshman year of high school. Extended family gathered: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I only saw twice a year. The table seated 22. Mama stood to make a toast, and I remember watching her face in that candlelight, genuinely hoping. "I am so grateful," she said, "for my beautiful daughter Adrian, who just made junior varsity cheer, and for my son Marcus, who is really coming into his own this year." She paused, looked around the table, and then, almost as an afterthought, "And Celeste is doing well in school." There was a little ripple of polite acknowledgement. Someone's fork clinked. My cousin Darius, who was 15 and sitting across from me, caught my eye. His expression was careful, uncomfortable. He looked away first. Nobody ever said anything. That was the thing about witness and silence. They are not the same as innocence. High school became my other world, the world where I could breathe. At Carver High, I was not the embarrassment. I was student body treasurer sophomore year, newspaper editor junior year, and captain of the debate team by senior spring. My English teacher, Miss Calloway, told me once quietly after class, "Celeste, you have one of the sharpest minds I have ever taught." I hope someone at home is telling you that. Nobody at home was telling me that, but I heard it. I banked it. I started a private ledger inside myself. The things people outside my family said about me. The evidence that contradicted the verdict they had handed down years ago. Of 4 gigapascals, National Honor Society, 3 summer internships, a friend group, real friends, people who chose me, led by my best friend since 5th grade, Kezia Ware, who was the funniest and most fiercely loyal person I had ever known. Kezia knew some of what happened at home. Not everything. I had spent years protecting my family's image with a loyalty they had never extended to me, and old habits are tenacious. But she knew enough. She would sometimes, without explanation, show up at my house on a Friday night with snacks and a movie, and that particular Kezia Ware energy that said, "You don't have to explain anything. I'm just here." I did not know then how much that would matter. I know now. The breaking point, the one that cracked something loose in me permanently, happened in a way so small and so clarifying that I almost missed its significance. It was the fall of my sophomore year. I had applied, through school, for a youth leadership conference in Atlanta, a 4-day thing with speakers and workshops and college prep sessions. I was one of 3 students selected from Carver High. There was a small registration fee, $112. I asked my father. He said he'd think about it. 2 weeks later, Adrienne mentioned at dinner that she wanted a new dress for her sorority's social event. The dress cost $200. My mother took her shopping the following Saturday. I did not ask again about the conference. I asked Miss Calloway instead, who connected me with the school's discretionary fund and covered the fee herself. I did not tell my parents I went. They did not ask where I was those 4 days. That was the moment something in me went still. Not sad, not angry, still. Like a compass that had finally found north after years of spinning. I understood then that I could not change the weather. I could only decide how long I was willing to stand in the rain. Junior year, I started building my exit. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I have heard people romanticize the dramatic escape, the midnight flight, the clean break. This was not dramatic. It was methodical and quiet and deliberate, the way I did everything that actually mattered to me. I made lists. I researched. I thought in systems. If my family had understood me at all, they might have recognized this as the same brain they had spent years criticizing at the dinner table. The same precision they'd called cold was now the thing keeping me alive. I researched colleges the way other kids researched car models or basketball stats. I needed distance, scholarship money, and a place where no one knew my name. I narrowed it to schools with strong financial aid, preferably outside the South or Northwestern. Vanderbilt was too close. Johns Hopkins. Howard, but Howard was where Adrienne had said she might want to go someday, so I quietly moved it lower on the list. I was not willing to share even a zip code with the life I was leaving. I found my target in November of junior year. Columbia University, New York City. Full need-based aid for students who qualified. Their acceptance rate was single digits, but my counselor, Mrs. Patterson, a small, unhurried woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at my transcript and said, "Celeste, you apply wherever you want to apply. Don't let anyone tell you to aim smaller." Nobody at home asked about my college plans. I had a moment, I remember it precisely, a Wednesday in December, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, when I realized that if I disappeared, it might take my family 24 hours to notice. I was not being melodramatic, I was being accurate. Adrienne was away at cosmetology school by then. Marcus was in and out, sleeping at friends' houses, drifting. My parents both worked long hours. Our house was already a collection of people who moved around each other without touching. I started working that winter, weekends at a bakery downtown, Mrs. Hattie Odom's place on 3rd Street, a woman who paid me fairly and never once asked me to smile more. Evenings I babysat for our neighbors, the Garcias, whose kids were 7 and 4, and genuinely delightful. By February, I had opened a savings account at a credit union across town using my school ID and a bus transfer. I told no one. The money was not just money. It was a proof of concept. It was evidence that I could sustain myself outside the ecosystem I had been born into. Every deposit was a small act of defiance, so quiet it didn't even make a sound. My 17th birthday fell on a Sunday. I woke up that morning doing what I had trained myself to do in those years, keeping expectations carefully small, protecting myself from hope. Adrian remembered and texted me, "Happy B-Day, sis." That was it. Marcus had forgotten, or pretended to. My father came downstairs, made coffee, read something on his phone, and said, as he passed through the kitchen, "Birthday girl," with the tone of a man narrating a calendar. My mother baked a cake. I want to give her that she made the effort of a cake. It was from a box, devil's food, my least favorite flavor. She had gotten my name right, on the top, at least, written in drugstore icing in her own handwriting. Celeste. Just the name. No happy. No birthday. Just Celeste. Like a label. We sat at the table, the four of us plus Marcus, who had appeared for the occasion, and ate the cake in a silence that had texture to it. My mother had invited no one. Adrian's birthday parties, growing up, had been events, actual events, with decorations and guests, and Mama staying up the night before to make sure everything was right. Mine were this: a labeled cake and the sound of forks. An hour later, Kezia called. "Girl, get dressed right now. Do not argue with me." She had organized a birthday dinner at my favorite restaurant, a Jamaican place on 7th that I had mentioned loving once, 8 months earlier. She had remembered. She had invited our 6 closest friends, collected money, bought me gifts, a beautiful leather journal with my initials embossed in gold on the cover, because she knew, because she always knew, and a set of drawing pens and a collection of essays by Black women writers that I had been wanting for months. Our friend Trey, who was usually the jokester of the group, got quiet at some point in the evening. He looked at me across the table and said, very simply, "We see you, Celeste. The real you. Whatever's happening at home, we see you." I held it together until I got home that night. Then I sat on my bedroom floor in the dark and cried for a long time. Not out of sadness, exactly. Out of the particular grief of being seen clearly by people who should have had nothing to do with it, because the people who should have seen you first looked the other way. I posted a photo from dinner the next morning. Kezia and me, laughing. My journal in front of me on the table. Mama saw it and came to find me in my room. "So you had time for your little friends," she said, standing in my doorway. "But you couldn't appreciate what we did for you here." "What you did for me," I said, and my voice was so steady it surprised us both. "We gave you a birthday. We're your family. You gave me a box cake with my name on it. Alone." I looked at her. Adrian's 16th birthday had a DJ. Her face changed in a way I can only describe as a tightening, all the softness going somewhere else. "You have always made everything harder than it needs to be. You have always made us feel like we were never enough for you." "That's interesting," I said, and then I went back to my homework. She did not speak to me for 3 days. I used the time to research scholarship essays. The acceptance letters began arriving in January of senior year. I had applied to 11 schools. I got into 9 of them. Columbia came back in late March with a full financial aid package that covered everything: tuition, housing, meals, a small stipend for books. Mrs. Patterson actually screamed. I had to ask her to close her office door. I told my parents that night at dinner. I waited for a pause in the conversation, which was mostly my father, describing a problem at work, and my mother making sympathetic sounds, and said, as evenly as I could, "I got into Columbia. Full scholarship. New York." The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of calculation. Finally, "Daddy, New York City. That's far." "Yes." "You couldn't get into Spelman?" Adrian looked at Spelman. Adrian had looked at Spelman for approximately 2 weeks before deciding cosmetology school was her path. I did not say this. Columbia is one of the best universities in the country, Mama. I know what Columbia is, Celeste. I'm saying it's far away from your family, from people who love you. She let that word land. Love. Is that what you want? To go off somewhere and leave us? Marcus looked up from his phone just long enough to say, "She'll be back in a semester." New York is rough. He was 21 years old, employed part-time at a car wash, living in our basement. "I'm going," I said. And then I finished my food and washed my dish and went upstairs. That night, I heard them talking in the living room. My parents have always been louder than they realize. Mama's voice. "There is no way she got a full scholarship to Columbia. She's exaggerating for attention. You know how she is. Even if she did, she'll make us look bad. She'll tell people up there God knows what about this family." I stood in the hallway in the dark, listening, and something inside me that had been tightly coiled for 5 years, finally, quietly, let go. Not broke, released. They weren't worried I would fail. They were worried I would leave and take my story with me. After that, I stopped performing for them. Stopped trying to soften my presence, make myself smaller, angle my achievements to fit the shape of what they could celebrate. When Mama said something diminishing, I did not engage. I simply looked at her and left the room. Daddy made a comment once about how I thought I was better than everyone now. And I said, "No, Daddy, just better than this," and kept walking. I read about the gray rock method online, the idea that you make yourself utterly uninteresting to people who feed on emotional reaction. Dull, flat, unresponsive. You give them nothing to push off of. I practiced it with the same discipline I practiced debate arguments or college essays. The effect on my mother was immediate and visible. She did not know what to do with me when I would not fight. I worked both jobs through the spring. By May, I had $4,000 in my savings account. Money no one knew about. Money that was entirely mine. I bought my own toiletries. Bought my own bus passes. Bought the dress I wore to prom with friends, because I was not going to ask anyone in that house for anything I did not have to. The night before junior prom, Kezia's mom had taken us both to get our nails done and bought us dinner and photographed us in her backyard for an hour. When I came home, my mother glanced at me in the doorway and said, "You look nice," and went back to the television. My father looked up. "Don't stay out too late." That was it. I wrote in my journal that night, "I am not going to be angry about this forever. Anger is heavy, and I will need to move fast." Graduation was May 22nd. I was valedictorian. 4 gigapascals. Perfect attendance senior year. 3 AP courses. Regional debate champion. Mrs. Patterson arranged a small reception in the counseling office the week before, brought in a sheet cake, and invited a handful of teachers. She cried a little, which embarrassed us both, and then laughed at herself and said, "You are going to do things, Celeste, things people will talk about." I wrote my commencement speech myself. I worked on it for 3 weeks, drafting and cutting and reshaping. I wanted it to be honest without being an accusation. I wanted it to be true without being a wound. The final version had a line that I had written for exactly 1 set of ears in that auditorium, though no one watching would have known it. Some of us had to learn, earlier than we should have, that the voice in your head trying to tell you who you are is not always a trustworthy narrator. That the most radical act available to us is to believe in ourselves more than we believe the story other people have written for us. We did not survive, despite what we came from. We survived because something in us always knew we were meant for somewhere else. My family arrived 11 minutes after the ceremony started. I saw them slip in through the side doors. Mama in her church dress, Daddy in a collared shirt, Marcus looking like he had just woken up. Adrian had not come. When they called my name for valedictorian, the auditorium stood. Teachers and students and parents of people I barely knew, standing and clapping, some people hollering. Kezia was in the front row, screaming my name so loud they could probably hear her on the next block. My family did not stand. I found them in the crowd afterward, near the parking lot. Mama hugged me with her arms only, leaving space between our bodies. Daddy shook his head slowly, like a man looking at something he does not quite understand, and said, "You did good today, Celeste." 3 words, after 17 years. "Thank you, Daddy." We went to lunch at a chain restaurant. Mama ordered the salmon. Daddy ate a burger. Marcus was on his phone. We talked about the weather, about Marcus's car making a noise, about whether Adrian was coming back for the 4th of July. We talked about everything except what had just happened. Over lukewarm bread, Daddy looked at me and said, "Colombia, in September. You're really going." "I'm really going." He nodded. "Don't expect us to drive you up there. New York driving is something else." "I know," I said. "I've already figured it out." He nodded again. He seemed, if I had to name it, almost relieved. I bought him a Father's Day card 3 weeks later, wrote something in it I had spent a long time on, left it on the kitchen counter with a small gift, a bottle of the cologne he'd mentioned once that he used to wear when he was younger. I found them both in the trash that evening, the gift wrap still on, the card not opened. I went upstairs, added the date and the details to my journal, and continued packing. That same night, I heard my parents and Marcus in the living room, voices low but carrying. I sat on the top stair and listened the way you listen when you already know the ending. When she leaves, that's it. I'm not pretending anymore. If she wants to go off and act like she's better than this family, she can live with that choice. She'll fail out first semester and come crawling back. And when she does, she figures it out herself. I'm done walking on eggshells around her. Then my father, who had barely spoken to me in 17 years, in the quietest voice, "She was never really one of us. We all know it. Might as well stop pretending." I did not cry. I want to record that plainly. I sat on that stair in the dark and felt something I can only describe as the end of a question. I had been asking for 17 years whether I was wrong about them. That night, they answered. I walked back to my room. I pulled out my journal and wrote, June 14th. They voted me out. Unanimous. I'm going to get some sleep. And I did. The best sleep I'd had in years. The departure date was September 5th. My flight left at 6:15 in the morning. I packed slowly over the weeks between graduation and September, hiding things in my closet in an orderly, systematic way that I think would have delighted my teachers and baffled my family. Clothes, folded. Books, stacked. Journals, all 6 of them wrapped in a sweater. Nana Joe's jewelry, what was left of it, in a small velvet pouch, inside a sock, inside a shoe. Photos of me and Kezia, of the debate team, of a trip to Gulf Shores the summer before junior year, when Kezia's family had included me without ceremony, as if I had always been there. No family photos. There was nothing I needed to remember that my body didn't already know. 3 weeks before I left, Mama asked about move-in logistics. She said it the way you ask about a dentist appointment. Necessary, but unpleasant. So what's the plan? Are we driving you up? I've booked my flight, I told her, not looking up from my laptop. Kezia's cousin is taking me to the airport. A pause. You didn't think to include your family? I looked up then. Daddy said in May not to expect help with the move. I took him at his word. Her face did something complicated. That's not what he meant, Celeste, and you know it. I really didn't know it, I said. So I made other arrangements. I went back to my laptop. She stood in my doorway for a moment longer and then left. It was the first time I had ever ended a conversation with my mother simply by returning to what I was doing. It felt like setting down something very heavy after a very long walk. I had told Kezia everything by then. Not bits of it, not the edited version everything, the group chat, the jewelry, the Thanksgiving toast, the things I had heard from the staircase. She had listened the way Kezia always listened, without interrupting, without performing sympathy, just absorbing. And when I finished, she had been quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know what this is, right? It has a name." I know. Celeste. What they did to you is abuse. Emotional abuse. Sustained, deliberate, targeted. You know that. I know, I said again. And I did know. I had known it for 2 years, since I was 15, and found the language for it in a library book. But hearing Kezia say it out loud, in her voice, in her bedroom, with the fan going and the street sounds coming through the window, it did something different to me. It made it real in a way that my private knowing never quite had. You don't have to go back, she said. After September 5th, you don't have to go back. Not for Christmas. Not for anything. That's the plan, I said. She reached over and held my hand, and we sat like that for a while. September 4th was my last night. I barely slept, but not from anxiety, from the particular alertness of someone standing at a threshold. I lay in my childhood bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about Nana Jo, who had held my face in her warm, dry hands when I was 8 years old and said, "Baby, you are something special. Don't you let nobody make you forget that." I thought about Miss Calloway, who had asked me to stay after class once just to tell me I was worth knowing. I thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had screamed when I got into Columbia. I thought about all the people outside that house who had seen me clearly and without agenda, and I felt, for the first time in memory, the full weight of what they had given me. I set my alarm for 4. I showered quietly, dressed in the dark. I did one slow, final circuit of the room, making sure I had everything I needed, checking the dresser drawers twice, because I am the kind of person who checks twice. I had written a note. I had thought about it for weeks what to say, whether to say anything, whether silence was its own kind of message. Eventually, I decided, 1 page, no sentiment, just the truth, stated clearly, the way I had learned to state things. Dear Patricia and Raymond, I am leaving for Columbia today. By the time you read this, I'll already be in the air. I am not angry. I want to say that first because it's true, and because I think you might expect anger from me, and that expectation would give you something to push against. I am not angry. I am done. You told me I was an embarrassment for most of my childhood. You celebrated my sister and excused my brother and looked at me like a problem you hadn't anticipated. You called me too sensitive when I named what was happening, and too cold when I stopped reacting. You threw away Daddy's Father's Day card and gift without opening them. You held a family meeting to discuss erasing me from your lives, and I heard it from the stairs. I am not telling you these things to wound you. I am telling you so that you cannot, years from now, say you didn't know. I would have loved being part of this family. I tried, for 17 years, to find a way to fit, but I understand now that the fitting was never going to happen, and that understanding has taken a long time and cost me more than I will ever fully account for. I forgive you. I say that not as a gift to you, but as a release for myself. Carrying this much weight is not something I plan to do in the next part of my life. Do not look for me. I am not disappearing. I am arriving. There is a difference. Take care of yourselves. Celeste. I left it on my pillow, folded, my name written on the outside. I carried my bags downstairs at 4:47 in the morning. The house was still and dark, and smelled like it always had pine sol, and faintly, underneath, something that had always struck me as the smell of held breath. I stood in the living room for a moment and looked at the family photos on the wall. Adrian at prom, Marcus at his first job, grinning in a uniform. A few with all 4 of us, all taken before I was old enough to understand what I was looking at. I was not in most of them. I had not noticed that, or had noticed it without registering it, until this moment. Standing in the dark at 4:47 in the morning, with my whole life in 2 suitcases and a backpack, I noticed it. I turned and walked to the front door, unlocked it, stepped outside. The morning was warm and humid, Alabama at the end of summer. Still dark, but with the first faint thinning at the edge of the sky. I locked the door behind me with my key, the way I had been locking it for years, and then I placed the key in the mailbox and did not look back. Kezia's cousin Marcus, a different Marcus, a better Marcus, a young man who had driven 30 minutes out of his way without complaint, was waiting at the curb. He loaded my bags without ceremony, which I appreciated. "Ready?" he said. "Since I was 12, I said. He laughed, and we drove. At the airport, he carried my bags to the door and then looked at me with the serious expression of someone who has been briefed. Kezia had told him what she could. "You're gonna do great things," he said. "I can just tell about people." I hugged him. Then I picked up my bags and walked through those sliding doors and did not look back, not once, because there was nothing behind me I needed to carry. Colombia was the first place I ever felt the specific freedom of being unknown. Nobody there had a story about me. Nobody had expectations built from years of misreading. I walked onto that campus on a bright September morning, and I was nobody's embarrassment and nobody's disappointment and nobody's inconvenient third child. I was just a girl from Birmingham with 2 suitcases and a full scholarship and a deep cellular relief that I had not expected to feel so immediately. My roommate was a woman named Imani Osei Bonsu, from Accra, by way of Silver Spring, Maryland. Pre-law, effortlessly warm, possessed of the useful ability to make any space feel like home within 48 hours. She looked at me when I walked in and said, "Oh good, you have books." I was worried I was going to get someone who didn't have books. We were friends within a week, close friends within a month. I decided something in those first weeks. I was not going to perform recovery. I was not going to make my past the loudest thing about me. I would carry it, you always carry it, but I would not let it set the terms of my new life. So I signed up for too many things on purpose. I joined the Black Students Alliance and the campus newspaper and a Saturday morning tutoring program for kids in Harlem. I took a fiction writing workshop even though I had never written fiction. I let people know me slowly and on my own terms. My phone stayed quiet. My mother called twice in the first week. I did not answer. She left voicemails I did not listen to before deleting. Adrian texted once, "Ma's upset. Don't you think you could have said goodbye?" I sat with that message for a while, and then typed, "I left a note," and then blocked the number. My father did not call. Marcus did not call. My Aunt Beverly, Mama's sister, the one who had said I looked like I was always bracing for impact, sent a Facebook message 6 weeks in. "Your mother is worried sick, Celeste. Family is everything. You can't just disappear." This kind of selfishness reflects on all of us. I read it twice. Then I replied, "Aunt Beverly, I spent 17 years in that house, and in all those years, not one person in my family stepped in when I needed them. Not at Thanksgiving when Mama made her toast. Not when my things were stolen. Not when I was called an embarrassment at 12 years old. Family may be everything, but what we had was not family. I'm not being selfish. I'm surviving. I hope you are well." I sent it, closed the app, and went to my fiction writing workshop. Thanksgiving that year, I stayed on campus. Imani's parents flew up and took us both to dinner in Midtown, a Nigerian restaurant where Imani's mother spent 20 minutes selecting the right thing for me because, she said, I looked like I needed a real meal. Imani's father asked me questions about my plans and listened to the answers with the concentration of a man who found other people genuinely interesting. It felt foreign in the way that good things feel foreign when you have not had them. Back home in Birmingham, I later learned, the holiday had not gone smoothly. Kezia told me everything, reluctantly, because I had asked. Apparently, at a gathering that included some mutual family friends, my mother had begun her version of events. How I had vanished without explanation. How she could not understand what she had done wrong. How ungrateful children broke their parents' hearts. Kezia, who had never been particularly interested in holding her tongue, had not held her tongue. "Mrs. Beaumont," she had said, in front of whoever was in that room, "you called Celeste an embarrassment for years. Your whole family treated her like a mistake. She didn't abandon you. She got out. And the fact that you're still making yourself the victim in this story tells me everything I need to know about why she left." Kezia told me this over the phone, her voice still hot with it weeks later. "Some people backed me up," she said. "Some cousins of yours. An uncle, Mrs. Dalton from church, said she'd noticed things for years, but hadn't wanted to interfere." What did my mother say? She tried to defend herself, but the room was different after. You know how a room gets different. I knew. My cousin Darius messaged me around Christmas. I remembered him from that Thanksgiving years ago, the one who had caught my eye across the table and looked away. His message said, "I owe you an apology. I saw things for a long time and I said nothing, and that was cowardly. I'm sorry, Celeste. I really am." I wrote back, "Thank you for saying so. Silence was a choice. I appreciate you naming it." He replied, "That's fair. I hope New York is good to you." New York was very good to me. I am writing this at a desk in my apartment in the West Village. It is spring of my senior year. Outside my window, the neighborhood is doing what it does on Saturday mornings, slowly, noisily, beautifully waking up, and I have coffee going and 2 cats sleeping on my reading chair, and a life that looks, from the outside, like something I drew up in a notebook and then went and made real. I am graduating in May with a double major in sociology and creative writing, and a job offer from a nonprofit in the city that does policy work around child welfare. I start in July. I am also enrolled in a graduate program beginning next fall, a full fellowship, because apparently this is what happens when you stop spending energy on people who don't want you to grow. I have been in therapy since sophomore year. My therapist, Dr. Anita Park, is a quiet woman who has the gift of asking exactly the right question at exactly the wrong moment, which is to say, the right moment for my growth. She has helped me understand a few things that took a long time to understand, that what happened to me was not my fault and was also not entirely their intention, that people can cause harm without being cartoonishly evil, that my family had their own wounds, their own inheritances of silence and colorism and expectation, and those wounds flowed through them and into me without any of us fully choosing the current. Understanding this has not made me want to call them. It has made me less angry, which is different from forgiving, and forgiving is different from returning. I have forgiven them. I have not returned, and I do not plan to. Last fall, my father sent a friend request on social media. I looked at it for 3 days before declining. He sent no message with it, just the request, just his name in a notification, which struck me as both entirely him and somehow, in its smallness, almost sad. My mother sent a letter. She had gotten my campus address somehow. I later figured out it was through a church contact who had a connection to Columbia's administration, which is the kind of thing that used to impress me but now just seems like effort going in the wrong direction. I held the envelope for a long time. Then I placed it, unopened, in the recycling. Whatever was in that letter, I did not need to read it. There is nothing she could write that would change what I know, and there is nothing I owe the girl I used to be except this: to never let anyone talk her into going back. Imani asked me once we were up late, junior year, that particular kind of late where honesty gets easier, whether I ever missed them. My family. I thought about it for a real moment. I miss the family I wanted them to be, I said. The one I used to imagine was possible if I just figured out the right way to be. I miss that. But that family was a fiction. The actual people, I don't miss them. I just used to need something from them that they never had. She nodded. And now? Now I know where to find what I need. I have a chosen family now. Imani, who graduated last year and lives 8 blocks away and comes over on Sundays. Kezia, who is finishing nursing school in Birmingham and visits every spring, and for whom I keep a standing reservation at the Jamaican place on 7th, because old loyalties deserve good food. My friend group from the BSA, 6 people who know me properly and love me without requiring me to be smaller. Dr. Park, who holds space for my history without letting it swallow my present. And Devon Achebe, my partner of 2 years, who grew up in a different kind of family, boisterous, enormous, loud with love, and who, when I first explained my history, looked at me with such clean, uncomplicated bafflement that I had to laugh. "They didn't come to your graduation," he'd said. "They came late. They didn't clap." He had sat with that for a long moment. Then, "I don't understand people sometimes." "Neither do I," said, "but I've stopped needing to." He told me last month that when he thinks of the word brave, he thinks of me, not because of what I left, because of what I built after. I have thought about that a lot. The girl my family called an embarrassment spent 5 years absorbing everything they said like it was weather, like it was permanent, like it was the truth. She was quiet and careful and sharp and lonely, and she kept a journal because she needed proof that reality was real. She worked 2 jobs and saved $4,000 and applied to 11 colleges and wrote her own valedictorian speech and walked out of a house at 4:47 in the morning with her whole life in 2 bags. She was never an embarrassment. She was always just in the wrong house. I am not angry at my parents. I have said that before and I mean it more each time. They gave me, as Kezia once pointed out, with her gift for the precise and devastating observation, one extraordinary thing: the absolute certainty that I would rather build something from nothing than stay in a place that required me to be nothing. I won, if winning is the word, by understanding that love is not something you are owed by blood. It is something that is built, intentionally, between people who choose each other. My family did not choose me, but I have been chosen since by enough people to know the difference between a house and a home. I am Celeste Renee Beaumont, 21 years old, about to graduate from Columbia University with honors, about to begin work I actually care about, about to spend the summer reading on a balcony with a person who thinks I am brave. I left without goodbye. I arrived without apology. And the girl they said would always be their embarrassment turned out to be, quietly and entirely, the only one of them who made it out whole.